The first time you understand what's being sold, it doesn't feel like a secret at all. It feels ordinary, like soap, lamp oil, or cough drops. In a late 1800s frontier town, you can step up to a counter beneath a ceiling fan that barely stirs the air, and there it is. A small bottle, a packet, a tin, a promise. I imagine the scene the way countless Americans lived it. Dust clinging to boots, sunburnt necks, one long day already behind them, and another waiting just ahead. The West runs on distance. It runs on aching backs and split hands, on cattle drives that don't end when you want them to, on railroad tracks that must be laid before winter, on mines that send men into the earth and expect them to climb back out, ready to do it all again tomorrow. So when something appears that claims to dull the sharp edges of life, fatigue, pain, frayed nerves, it isn't treated as a danger. It's treated as relief. In the story I'm telling, this coca-based stimulant doesn't arrive as a shadowy vice. It arrives with a clean label. It arrives as medicine. In the Old West, that word can mean almost anything. A traveling salesman opens a case of bottles the way a preacher opens a Bible, and the crowd leans in, because the frontier is short on doctors and long on desperation. A miner's cough isn't abstract. A rancher's toothache isn't a small inconvenience. A mother's headache isn't something she can simply wrest away. The supply chain is almost unsettlingly simple. No back alley required. You just need a town. Pharmacies stock it. General stores stock it. Taverns and roadside stops might too. And if you're far from all of that, the mail delivers it. Catalogs turning distant factories into a storefront on your kitchen table. It's sold as energy for the worn down, as courage for the anxious, as comfort for the hurting. It's marketed to people who can't afford to be weak, because weakness on the frontier can cost you your job, your reputation, even your place in a camp that doesn't wait for anyone. The packaging matters. The language matters. This isn't framed as a reckless thrill. It's framed as a tool. Practical. Modern. A small push to survive an endless shift. A small lift to keep going when stopping isn't an option. In a world where survival depends on pace, feeling better becomes a kind of currency. The bottle doesn't just sell a substance. It sells the idea that you can outwork your own body. That exhaustion is negotiable. That the hardships of the frontier can be bargained with if you have the right tonic in your pocket. And because it's legal and easy to find, it spreads quietly, not with spectacle at first, but with routine. One purchase becomes a habit of thought. When the day is too long, there's a product for that. When the night is too heavy, there's a product for that. When the pain won't leave, there's a product for that. Listen closely, and you can hear the tension beneath the sales pitch. This isn't just about a new remedy. It's about what happens when a nation proud of its toughness is handed an escape hatch, an everyday shortcut, and told it's not only acceptable, but smart. That's where the hook tightens, because the frontier doesn't stay frozen in its first impression. What begins as a simple exchange, a bottle slid across a counter, will become a question the country can't avoid. What exactly have we invited into ordinary American life? And what will it cost when the promises finally come due? Before it ever sat on a shelf in an American storefront, it began as a leaf, green, bitter, and unremarkable in the hand. I keep returning to that image because the story changes the moment the leaf becomes something else. A plant known through lived experience is transformed into a modern product, interpreted and explained by strangers far removed from where it grew. High in the Andes of South America, coca shrubs thrive in regions that today include Peru and Bolivia. For centuries, local communities incorporated coca leaves into everyday life. Historical accounts describe people placing the leaves in the cheek, letting their effects unfold slowly, especially during long workdays and in the thin mountain air. In the Inca world, coca was associated with endurance and adaptation to altitude. and archaeologists have found traces of its use in ancient remains and artistic depictions. When the Spanish arrived, early records describe a clash of perspectives. Some colonial authorities initially tried to suppress coca, viewing it as a symbol of beliefs they sought to erase. Yet practicality quickly complicated ideology. Coca helped workers withstand brutal conditions. Over time, Spanish rule shifted from restriction to regulation, allowing coca, taxing it, and converting a local practice into a source of income. That shift matters. The moment a plant appears in government ledgers, it begins to move differently through the world. Knowledge of coca's effects reached Europe, and by the 19th century, European scientists had taken an interest. Their focus was no longer the leaf as a cultural tradition, but the search for its active component, something that could be isolated, quantified, and sold. From here, the pace of the story accelerates. In 1855, the German chemist Friedrich Geiche is widely credited with isolating a coca alkaloid, which he named erythroxyline. That single act, extracting a concentrated compound from a plant, changed everything. Soon after, in the late 1850s and into 1860, Albert Niemann refined the process, described the substance in detail, and introduced the name cocaine to scientific circles. What had once been a leaf with gradual, modest effects became a potent substance capable of acting powerfully in tiny doses. It's important to hold two truths at once here. On one side, the medical world was genuinely curious. 19th century doctors were searching for better tools, ways to reduce pain, to make procedures more manageable, to help patients endure treatment. On the other side, commerce was watching carefully, ready to transform any promising discovery into a marketable product. The breakthrough that made coca extracts feel unmistakably modern was numbing. Researchers discovered that the refined compound could block sensation when applied locally. In 1884, ophthalmologist Carl Kohler demonstrated its usefulness in eye surgery, and word of the discovery spread quickly. In an era with few reliable anesthetic options, this result appeared revolutionary. That is the moment the leaf crossed a line. Once a substance is published in journals, once it is weighed, tested, and named, it acquires a new authority. It stops being what people do in a distant mountain culture and becomes what science says in Western cities. The label reshapes public perception. It no longer feels like folk knowledge. It feels sanctioned. Tracing this path, from Andean fields to European laboratories, I see the stage being set for the American chapter. When the frontier West finally encounters this stimulant, it will arrive fully formed, confidently labeled, neatly packaged, and backed by the language of progress. But its transformation begins here, in the 1800s, when a traditional leaf is distilled into a concentrated chemical and ushered into medicine, commerce, and public life as a symbol of modernity. By the time posters appeared on walls and newspaper ads began recycling the same promises, the coca-based stimulant was no longer a laboratory curiosity. It was a business. It was a brand. And in America, the quickest route into people's lives wasn't the doctor's office. It was the ordinary places exhausted people already visited when they needed help. By the late 1800s, entrepreneurs had figured out how to package energy and relief in forms that felt familiar. There were coca wines and sweet syrups, cough mixtures, throat lozenges, tonics, and chewable products meant to perk you up. Some companies even sold coca leaf cigarettes. In medical settings, doctors used specially prepared solutions because the numbing effect genuinely mattered in certain procedures. And in towns where clean water wasn't guaranteed, a sealed bottle with a label could seem safer than whatever came from the street. The frontier only widened the market. Work was punishing, time was money, and rest was a luxury. Laborers on rail lines, in mines, in factories, and along busy rivers looked for any legal edge that made long shifts feel survivable. Some employers even supplied the stimulant to workers, convinced it would boost output. Later accounts suggest these decisions were also shaped by racist assumptions about black workers, an ugly pattern that would echo through public debates and enforcement for years. What stays with me is how normal the sales pitch sounded. The claims were broad, confident, almost casual. Eat less, work longer, speak clearer, hurt less, be brave, be calm. In a country that rewarded toughness, a product that promised toughness in a bottle didn't feel like a gamble. It felt like progress. And then the story turns, right in the middle of the boom. And it turns in a way you might miss if you only follow the advertisements. I picture a railroad worker I'll call Tom. Not a famous man, just one of the countless people history rarely names. He starts with a small purchase because his shift runs past midnight and his body can't keep up. For a while, the tonic seems to do exactly what it promised. He shows up, he gets paid, he sends money home. And because it's legal and easy to find, he tells himself this is the responsible choice, the practical choice. But weeks turn into months, and the problem changes shape. It isn't just fatigue anymore. It's the need to take something just to feel normal. It's sleep that won't come when he finally lies down. It's a temper that ignites too fast. It's a friend noticing that Tom's eyes look different, that his laughter arrives at the wrong moment, that his hands won't settle, that there's a restlessness in him that never quite shuts off. That's the moral trap the frontier lays for ordinary people. Do you keep using the thing that helps you work, even as you feel it taking something back? Do you call it medicine because the label tells you to? Or do you admit the label might be protecting the seller more than it protects you? The same conflict plays out in business too. A Civil War veteran named John Pemberton developed a coca-infused wine called French wine coca, inspired by the popular Vin Mariani. When temperance laws reached Georgia in 1885, he reformulated, swapping wine for sugar, and created a drink that would eventually become Coca-Cola. After Pemberton's death, Isa Candler marketed it as a patent medicine, and by 1898 the company shifted course, pushing it as a beverage rather than a medicinal product. So the stimulant's American life split in two at once. Some products drifted toward everyday refreshment, while others stayed in the realm of quick fixes and miracle cures. And beneath both paths, the same reality kept spreading. When a powerful stimulant becomes cheap, legal, and ordinary, the line between help and harm can blur faster than anyone wants to believe. A change can begin as a whisper and end as a headline. That's what happens next. The coca-based stimulant that once looked like a tidy answer to fatigue and pain starts appearing in a different kind of story, one told in the language of fear rather than promise. In city dailies and small-town weeklies, the tone shifts. Articles begin framing the stimulant as a source of danger and public disorder. Some reports grow out of real cases, people behaving erratically after heavy use. Others rest on rumor, and some draw from something far darker. Racist stereotypes that cast Black Americans, especially Black men, as inherently dangerous, then used the stimulant as a way to dress that prejudice up as science. A society that had quietly tolerated the product when it was sold to workers now treated it as evidence of a problem that needed to be controlled. I try to imagine how this felt for ordinary readers. You wake up, buy coffee, unfold the paper, and the message is unmistakable. What was once marketed as helpful is now described as a public threat. When fear becomes the driving force, facts tend to suffer. Sensational language spreads easily. Careful context does not. And once public anxiety takes hold, officials feel pressure to act, even when the information behind the panic is thin or distorted. The response begins at the local level. Instead of a single national rule, a patchwork of city ordinances and state laws emerges. Boards of health and pharmacy boards step in, drawing on their authority over what can be sold in stores. Some jurisdictions focus on restrictions, record-keeping, limited quantities, moving the product behind the counter. Others go further. Georgia becomes an early example of a state moving to ban sales outright, signaling that the era of casual access is coming to an end. Around the same time, a different force enters the picture: consumer protection. In 1906, Congress passes the Pure Food and Drug Act, aimed at curbing mislabeled and adulterated products. The law doesn't immediately remove the stimulant from American life, but it reshapes the marketplace. Products once sold on mystery and sweeping claims are pushed toward more honest labeling, including disclosure of certain risky ingredients. That makes it harder to sell a miracle without scrutiny and gives regulators clearer grounds to challenge deception. Regulation, though, is never just about labels and paperwork. It also reshapes policing. As newspapers and officials repeat alarming claims, enforcement grows more aggressive in some communities, especially against those with the least power. A stimulant that had been openly sold for years becomes a marker of suspicion. Police routines change, patrols increase, street-level sweeps become more common. And because fear was intertwined with race in the public imagination, enforcement does not fall evenly. This is where the story becomes uncomfortable, because two truths exist at the same time. Heavy use of the stimulant could cause real harm, and communities had legitimate concerns about health and safety. Yet the loudest narratives were often the least fair, and the people most targeted were not the ones who profited most from selling the product. In practice, regulation often followed existing prejudice. By the early 1900s, the national conversation has shifted. The question is no longer whether the stimulant is useful, but who should be allowed anywhere near it. What began as an over-the-counter remedy is reimagined as a substance requiring control. And once the public accepts the idea that fear demands force, the road to stricter laws is already paved. One local ordinance, one sensational headline, and one uneven arrest record at a time. The final stage of this story doesn't arrive with a dramatic raid or a single explosive headline. It arrives quietly, through paperwork. By the early 1900s, the country had already changed its mind about what this coca-based stimulant represented. It had once been sold openly, spoken of as helpful, and woven into a marketplace built on confident promises. Then the mood shifted. States tightened regulations. Labels grew more cautious. Doctors, pharmacists, and lawmakers debated what should be allowed and who could be trusted to handle it. In the middle of that growing tension, Washington stepped in to do what local laws couldn't: create a national system. In 1914, Congress passed the Harrison Narcotics Tax Act. It didn't read like a moral judgment. It read like administration. Its logic was control through registration and taxation. Anyone who imported, produced, sold, or distributed certain drugs, including coca-derived products and opiate-based medicines, had to register, pay taxes, keep records, and follow strict rules about who could receive them and under what circumstances. On paper, it was a tax law. In real life, it changed everything. The stimulant was pushed out of the casual marketplace and into a far narrower medical channel. The corner store bottle, the mail-order miracle, the easy purchase after a long shift. Those options disappeared quickly. The legal environment tightened. Penalties became real. And once the federal government established a system of oversight and enforcement, the era of "buy it like aspirin" was over. This moment matters because it's bigger than any single substance. The Harrison Act marks one of the first times the United States used federal power to manage public health, commerce, and social order all at once. It also shows how rapidly a product can move from accepted to restricted when a society decides the cost is too high, or when fear and politics make that decision feel urgent. Zooming out, this shift runs alongside another transformation in American life. The frontier itself was disappearing. By the 1890 census, the government declared the frontier line closed, meaning settlement had spread so far that the old boundary no longer applied. The West still existed, But the idea of a vast, loosely governed edge of the nation was fading. In its place came systems, national rules, national agencies, national standards. So the story ends the way many American stories do, not with a gunshot, but with a form to fill out. That's the lesson that lingers. The journey from wonder remedy to restriction wasn't driven by science alone. It was shaped by business incentives, by marketing that blurred the line between help and hype, by newspapers that sometimes favored shock over accuracy, and by social bias that aimed enforcement at some communities more than others. The result wasn't just a law about one product. It was a framework that helped define how America would think about regulation for generations. Listen closely, and you can still hear the echo today. New products arrive with bold claims. People grow tired, stressed, hopeful. Companies promise solutions small enough to fit in your pocket. And the public swings between two instincts: trust the label or fear the harm. This story isn't here to argue that progress is dangerous or that rules are always right. It's here to show how quickly a nation can change its mind, and how those changes are often driven by forces that are human, complicated, and sometimes unfair. Because the next time something miraculous is sold as ordinary, you'll know to ask the question people on the frontier rarely had time to ask. Who benefits if you believe the promise, and who pays if it breaks? And if you want more true American stories told with care, stories where the details matter, stay with me, pass this along, and we'll keep going together.